What we've done in the West is two things. We've destroyed or pretended to destroy religion. We've said, oh, there's no God, there's no other realm. Science is the only thing we have now, and science can only measure material things, and because science can't demonstrate that any of these other realms exist, therefore they don't. So nothing exists except material matter. So you're just a creature who happened to have evolved, and you've been born and you're going to die. And that's that. The writer Lewis Mumford called this the myth of the machine. Progress is the story that we tell ourselves. It's absolutely central to Western mythology, and it's replaced our religious story, which was the Christian story in the West. It's replaced all of our other myths, and it's this notion, as you say, of forward momentum. Always, you're always moving away from something and you're moving towards something else. And I think it's probably quite unique in global terms, this story of progress, which comes out of the modern West. It doesn't come out of the medieval West. I mean, for example, in the Middle Ages in the West, there was no notion of progress. Life was seen as fairly cyclical. In the Christian way of seeing, this was where you were, and you existed within the world, you did God's work, and there was the cycle of the seasons, and there was no notion of forward motion. And you don't really get that in other cultures either. You might get it within a human life, and there are certain things that you can improve, but the notion that society as a whole is always moving away from something bad and towards something good. There's always a process of moral improvement going on. There's always a process of technological improvement going on. It's quite unique, I think, to the modern West. It's something that comes out of this particular area of the world, and we've again tried to globalize that. And it's fundamentally what keeps the machine going. Now, it's interesting because in some ways, things clearly do progress, right? So technologically, technology gets more advanced, technology gets more sophisticated. Medicine could get more advanced. So, it's possible to cure things now we couldn't cure 50 years ago. Some things have improved, obviously. And so because of that material improvement for some people in some ways, it's easier for us to believe that this is a system, or it's easier for us to believe that this is a progress which will continue, that we're moving towards a goal. And the question I ask myself is, well, what's the goal? What are we moving towards, and what are we moving away from? So the story we tell ourselves is that we used to be poor, we used to be stupid, we used to be superstitious, we used to believe in a load of rubbish that wasn't true, but now we have science, so we don't have to believe that. We used to be lacking in knowledge and wisdom. Now we have education, we have science, so we don't need religion, we don't need superstition. We have a certain sense of the individual over the community, and we're always moving towards improvement in all these areas, right? So we will have more power, we will have more wealth, we will have more health, we'll live longer, maybe we'll live forever. We'll be able to control everything, we'll be able to manage nature. And this attitude, the progressive attitude in the biggest sense of that word, infiltrates everything. So if you look at the environmental movement that I was involved in, for example, you see a movement of people which says, hang on a minute, we're destroying the natural world in our pursuit of progress. So what's the solution to that? And the mainstream answer is more progress, just a more sustainable version of it. So we'll solve this problem with different types of technology. We'll roll out the wind farms, we'll roll out possibly the nuclear power station, we'll roll out the solar panels, we'll roll out the electric cars, we'll change the way that we progress, but we won't question the notion of whether we're actually progressing towards something good. My feeling is that at the heart of the myth of progress is a fundamental desire for humans to be gods, effectively, to control nature, to control ourselves, to manipulate the earth at the genetic level, to effectively rebuild the entire world to suit the modern mentality, the mentality of enclosure and control. That's what we think we're moving towards. And what we can't face is the possibility that it might not be possible. Because if we stop believing in progress, we feel like we're stuck in some terrible endless prison that we can't escape from. We're trying to escape from something. That's what we're doing with progress. Because we can't face the human condition in some way. And in a traditional society, you have religion to help you with that. You have community to help you with that. You have a sense of the transcendent, and we've dumped all of that. So all we have is the material realm. So all we've got left is to control it down to the micro level so that we can make ourselves content, which isn't going to work. But we keep doing it, and because we don't have another story. It's fundamentally the story that we have. And again, I think a lot of the problems we have in society at the moment are coming from the fact that the story's breaking down. We can see that in some areas progress isn't possible and is even going backwards. But we don't have another way of seeing to deal with that. The reality of death always haunts humans because we are creatures that are able to see what's coming in a way that probably nothing else can. We're not aware of any other animals that really know their own mortality or can think about it in the way that we can or conceptualize it. So that's the kind of human condition, that's the human curse or blessing, that we have this consciousness that allows us to understand who we are and our sense of our internal selves and the fact that life's going to end, which we don't like. But every traditional society on earth has always had any numbers of ways of understanding this. So firstly, we have what modern people call religion, which is a very modern notion, by the way. The fact that there's the notion that there's a thing called religion, which is sort of slightly separate from your material life. Maybe you do it on a Sunday when you go to church, and some people do it and some people don't, is a very modern notion. The word religion in that sense is very new. In any traditional society, the spiritual dimension, the transcendent dimension, is just part of life because it's the way that everything is understood. So again, you could go back to medieval Christendom in Europe, and you can see that the whole of society is built around the Christian story. Everything from the way that the day is organised to the ritual year to the morals that you have. Everything is organised around what you believe God has done for you. In other societies with different religious faiths, the same thing is true. Everything is cored around this religious story. So we have a sense that this material realm is not the only realm. It might not even be the most important realm. Something comes after this. Something is beyond that. There's a whole spiritual realm. There's a God. There are gods. There are spirits. There are beings. And your material existence is a fairly small part of that. What you also have is a sense of time. So you've got, again, in all traditional societies, a sense that you're coming from your ancestors and you're giving something to your descendants. So you're a small part of a chain, right? And all of this stuff puts your mortality into perspective, right? You still don't want to die probably, but, well, maybe it doesn't matter so much, especially if you have a sense that something is coming beyond and that's what you're preparing yourself for. That is the normal human experience, right? For most of history, and indeed in most of the world, because more than 80% of the world is still religious now. What we've done in the West is two things. We've destroyed or pretended to destroy religion. We've said, oh, there's no God, there's no other realm. Science is the only thing we have now, and science can only measure material things, and because science can't demonstrate that any of these other realms exist, therefore they don't. So nothing exists except material matter. So you're just a creature who happened to have evolved, and you've been born and you're going to die. And that's that. The other thing we've done is destroyed our sense of continuity through time. So we're at the moment going through a process in the West where we're mocking and humiliating our own ancestors and taking our culture down. And we're also changing things so fast that we've no idea what the future will look like in even 50 years, so we don't know what we're passing on to our children. So we don't feel like we're part of a culture that is moving forward in time. We can't look at our ancestors and look at our descendants and say, I'm part of that. We're just individuals. So if you destroy religion, you tell yourself there's nothing beyond the material realm, and then you just limit yourself to your own individuality in the world, you're not part of a bigger community, then suddenly you're completely on your own in this meaningless, nihilistic void, and you're just a kind of meat suit wandering about, which is hideous, right? It's kind of, this is what Nietzsche predicted would happen as well. Nietzsche's kind of the prophet of the 21st century. And even though Nietzsche was very anti-Christian and anti-religious, he could also see the existential terror that would come when we destroyed religion, which is what's happened. So what do? We start to try and create our own transcendence. We start to build the metaverse. We start to try and talk about uploading our minds. We want to live forever. You could explain even something like the COVID neurosis like this. People are so terrified of death that they're prepared to create a pretty tyrannical society for 2 years, a massive control system, because we're terrified of death, because there's nothing else for us. We don't believe death leads us to anything else. We don't believe there's a God. We don't believe that there's any meaning beyond our material self. And we don't think we're going anywhere. Nothing matters except our personal, individual self. So we're suddenly these incredibly neurotic, terrified individuals operating within this giant machine, within a worldview which says nothing has any meaning except living for a very long time and getting what you want right now. And that's not a way that humans can really live. I don't think we've ever lived like that. There's a reason that every culture in human history has been religious, and that every culture in human history has had a sense of tradition and roots within time. Because if you don't have that, you can't actually survive. And also, it's probably true. Right? This is not everything there is. There is a God. All of these things are probably true. And if they are true, we're the only society in history that's rebelled against them all and told ourselves that it isn't true. And I don't think we can actually survive it. So I think we're living through this kind of disguised existential terror. And it is a fear of death. Because death is a terrifying thing if life doesn't have any meaning. That's the reality of it. So that's kind of where we are. But nobody wants to look at it that way. We can't talk about that. Because religion and superstition, etc., are one of the things we're supposed to be progressing away from. Because we have science and reason now, so we don't need that. That's something that people do when they don't have the scientific method. They just try and explain the world by inventing stories about gods. But what if that's wrong? What if the entirety of Western modernity and all of these stories about progress and science are actually incorrect? That's the question that we can't face.